It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon. Quiet, private, perfectly harmless. My husband had stepped out for just a minute, and I decided to surprise him with something bold, something that would bring us closer after weeks of tension. But the universe has a twisted sense of humor, because the moment I posed in a way I never expected anyone else to see, the door swung open, and it wasn't my husband. It was his best friend, frozen, speechless, staring at me like he'd just witnessed the end of the world. My heart stopped, my hands shook, my soul left my body. Shame swallowed me whole as his friend tried, and failed, to pretend he saw nothing. But as my panic rose, something unexpected happened. The situation took a turn neither of us could have predicted. A truth slipped out, a confession, a revelation that my husband had kept secret for months. That awkward moment? It didn't destroy my marriage. It exposed it. That day, humiliation wasn't the ending. It was the beginning of the truth I desperately needed. If you want to know how the most mortifying moment of my life became the catalyst for discovering my husband's hidden truth, hit that like button and subscribe now. Comment below about a moment of embarrassment that changed everything. This story will shock you. Let's begin. My name is Amanda, and I need to tell you about the afternoon that started as an attempt to save my marriage and ended with a revelation that changed everything I thought I knew about my relationship. This is a story about vulnerability, secrets, misplaced intentions, and how sometimes our most embarrassing moments force truths into the light that never would have surfaced otherwise. I'd been married to Ryan for 6 years. We met through mutual friends when I was 26 and he was 28, bonded over shared interests in hiking and terrible sci-fi movies, and built what I thought was a solid partnership. The first few years were genuinely good, filled with the kind of easy companionship that made marriage feel natural rather than effortful. But somewhere around year 4, things started shifting in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Ryan became more distant, spending longer hours at work, more evenings with his friends, more time absorbed in his phone even when we were together. Our physical intimacy dwindled from frequent to occasional to rare. When I tried to initiate conversations about the growing distance between us, Ryan would deflect or minimize, saying he was just stressed about work, that I was overthinking things, that every marriage goes through phases like this. By year 6, I felt like I was living with a roommate rather than a husband. We were polite and functional, coordinating schedules and household responsibilities, but the emotional and physical connection that had drawn us together had eroded to almost nothing. I'd suggested couples therapy multiple times, but Ryan always found reasons to postpone or dismiss the idea. I was lonely and increasingly desperate to reconnect with my husband in any way possible. I blamed myself for letting the relationship deteriorate, convinced that if I just tried harder or was more appealing or made better efforts, Ryan would respond and we could find our way back to each other. Looking back now, I can see how unhealthy that thinking was. But at the time, I genuinely believed the problem was my inadequacy rather than fundamental issues in our relationship. Ryan's best friend since college was a guy named Derek. They'd been roommates their senior year, stayed close after graduation, and maintained their friendship even when Derek moved to a different city for work. Derek visited maybe once every few months, staying with us when he was in town, and I'd always liked him well enough even though I didn't know him deeply. He was friendly and respectful, never made me feel uncomfortable, seemed genuinely happy that Ryan had found a good marriage. That particular Tuesday in November, Derek was visiting for a long weekend. He'd arrived the night before and was staying in our guest room. Ryan had taken the day off work to hang out with Derek, and they'd spent the morning catching up before Ryan realized he needed to run to the store to pick up some specific beer they both liked for their afternoon of watching football. Ryan left around 1 in the afternoon, saying he'd be back in 20 minutes. Derek was in the guest room unpacking and settling in. I was in our bedroom folding laundry, and suddenly I had what seemed like a brilliant idea at the time. Ryan would be gone just long enough for me to prepare a surprise that might spark some of the physical connection we'd been missing. Maybe if I greeted him when he returned looking attractive and deliberately seductive, it would remind him of earlier years when we couldn't keep our hands off each other. I put on the nicest lingerie I owned, a black lace set I'd bought months ago but never worn because there'd been no occasion. I arranged myself on our bed in what I hoped was an appealing pose, propped up on my side, one leg slightly bent, trying to look natural and inviting rather than awkward. I felt silly and self-conscious, but also hopeful that this might be the gesture that broke through Ryan's distance. I was checking the pose in the mirror across from our bed, adjusting my position slightly, when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I smiled, thinking Ryan was back earlier than expected, and my timing was perfect. The bedroom door pushed open, and I arranged my face into what I hoped was an inviting expression. Except it wasn't Ryan. Derek walked through the door, looking down at his phone, saying something about, "Hey, do you know where Ryan keeps the—" And then his head came up, and he saw me. Time stopped. We both froze completely, staring at each other in absolute horror. I was sprawled on the bed in black lace lingerie that left very little to imagination, caught mid-seductive pose. Derek was standing in the doorway, phone still in his hand, his face cycling rapidly through shock to embarrassment to what looked like panic. "Oh my God," Derek said, immediately spinning around so his back was to me. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I thought you were downstairs. I was looking for Ryan." "I'm sorry." I grabbed the nearest blanket and wrapped it around myself, my face burning with humiliation so intense I thought I might actually pass out. "It's okay," I managed to say, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. Just give me a second." I threw on sweatpants and a t-shirt faster than I've ever dressed in my life, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the drawstring. "Okay," I called out. "I'm dressed." Derek turned around slowly, his face still bright red, carefully looking anywhere except directly at me. "I am so sorry," he said again. "I should have knocked. I just assumed you were downstairs and Ryan might be up here and I wasn't thinking. Please, I'm really sorry." "It's my fault," I said miserably. "I shouldn't have been. I was surprising Ryan. I thought you were him. This is so mortifying." We stood there in awkward silence, both of us looking at the floor, the walls, anywhere but at each other. The embarrassment was so thick I could barely breathe. I wanted to disappear, to rewind time, to undo the last 2 minutes of my entire existence. "I didn't see anything," Derek said unconvincingly. "I mean, I'll forget I saw anything. This never happened. We can just pretend this never happened." "Thank you," I whispered, though we both knew there was no way either of us would ever forget this moment. More awkward silence. Then Derek said quietly, "Does Ryan know that you were planning to surprise him like that?" "Of course not," I said, confused by the question. "That's the whole point of a surprise." Derek made a strange sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. He sat down on the edge of our bed, which felt inappropriate given what had just happened, but also he suddenly looked like he needed to sit down. "Amanda," he said slowly, "I need to tell you something, and I don't know if I should tell you, but after what just happened, I think you need to know." Dread settled in my stomach. "What?" Derek looked at me with genuine sympathy and discomfort. "Ryan told me he wanted this to happen. Not exactly like this, but he wanted me to see you. Like this. He's been talking about it for months." I stared at Derek, unable to process what he was saying. "What are you talking about?" Derek looked miserable. "Ryan has this fantasy about me seeing you in intimate situations. He's brought it up multiple times over the past year, asking if I'd be interested in watching you guys together or seeing you in lingerie or other scenarios. I kept telling him no, that it wasn't appropriate, that we shouldn't involve you in something you clearly didn't know about. But he kept pushing, saying he was working up to asking you, that he thought you might be into it." The room was spinning. "You're saying my husband wants you to see me naked? To watch us have sex? He has a voyeuristic fantasy, I think," Derek said carefully. "Or maybe an exhibitionist one. I'm not totally sure of the psychology, but he specifically wants to involve me. He's been trying to set up situations where it might happen accidentally. When he said he was going to the store and you were home, I wondered if he was trying to create an opportunity. I just didn't expect you to actually be prepared." I sat down on the opposite side of the bed, as far from Derek as possible, trying to absorb this information. My husband had been trying to orchestrate situations where his best friend would see me in intimate settings, without my knowledge, without my consent. While I'd been desperately trying to save our marriage and reconnect with him, he'd been using our relationship as material for sexual fantasies that involved his friend. He left on purpose, I said slowly. He knew I was home. He told you I was home. He was probably hoping I'd be in the shower or changing or something and you'd accidentally walk in. Maybe, Derek said. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure that's what he was doing. Yeah. And you never told me? You knew Ryan was trying to set me up to be seen by you without my consent and you never said anything? Derek looked genuinely ashamed. I should have. I know I should have. I kept telling myself it was between you and Ryan, that it wasn't my place to interfere in your marriage. And honestly, I kept hoping Ryan would drop it or talk to you directly. I never thought he'd actually succeed in creating a situation. I'm sorry, Amanda. I should have told you sooner. We heard the front door open and Ryan's voice calling out that he was back with the beer. Derek and I looked at each other, and I saw my own anger and betrayal reflected in his expression. Don't tell him what happened, I said quietly. Don't tell him you walked in on me. I want to see what he does. Derek nodded. We went downstairs, both of us trying to act normal, though Ryan immediately sensed something was off. Everything okay? He asked, looking between us. Fine, I said, with a smile that felt like glass in my face. Derek was just helping me reach something on a high shelf. You got the beer? The rest of Derek's visit was torturous. I played the role of normal wife and hostess while internally seething. I watched Ryan, looking for signs of disappointment that his plan hadn't worked, looking for evidence of the person Derek had described. And I saw it, little tells I'd been missing or misinterpreting for months. The way Ryan kept asking if Derek needed anything from upstairs, the way he suggested Derek should feel free to explore the house, including the bedroom level, the way he seemed almost frustrated that nothing unusual had happened during his store run. After Derek left 2 days later, I confronted Ryan. I didn't tell him about the incident, just told him Derek had confessed about the fantasy and the attempts to orchestrate situations. Ryan tried to deny it at first, then minimize it, then defend it as just a harmless fantasy that he'd never acted on without my consent. Except you did act on it, I said coldly. You created situations designed to expose me to Derek without my knowledge or consent. You used our marriage and my body as material for your sexual fantasy without ever asking if I was comfortable with that. You violated my privacy and autonomy repeatedly. Ryan tried various responses, that I was overreacting, that nothing had actually happened so no harm was done, that lots of couples had fantasies involving other people, that he'd been planning to ask me eventually. None of it addressed the fundamental violation of setting me up repeatedly without my consent. Were you ever planning to actually talk to me about this? I asked. Or were you just going to keep creating accidental situations until something happened? Ryan couldn't answer that honestly. I moved out the following week. The marriage was already dying from distance and disconnection, but this revelation killed whatever was left. The man I'd married had spent months treating me like an object in his sexual fantasy rather than a partner deserving of honesty and respect. He'd involved his friend in schemes to violate my privacy. He'd prioritized his fantasy over my autonomy. The most mortifying moment of my life, being walked in on by my husband's best friend while wearing lingerie, turned out to be the catalyst for discovering truths I desperately needed to know. That embarrassment, as painful as it was, freed me from a marriage that had been built on increasingly problematic foundations. Derek apologized repeatedly for not telling me sooner. We had several long conversations where he explained the full extent of Ryan's fantasy discussions and his own discomfort with being repeatedly pressured to participate. I appreciated his honesty, even though I wished he'd spoken up sooner. He ended his friendship with Ryan shortly after, saying he couldn't maintain a relationship with someone who'd treat his wife that way. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. Ryan tried to argue that I was overreacting to a harmless fantasy, that I was destroying our marriage over nothing. But I knew better. The fantasy itself wasn't the problem. The problem was the months of deception, the attempts to violate my consent through orchestrated accidents, the prioritization of his sexual desires over my autonomy and dignity. That's the real story behind the worst moment of embarrassment in my life. What started as me trying desperately to save a dying marriage by being vulnerable and seductive ended with discovering my husband had been using that vulnerability for purposes I'd never consented to. The humiliation of being seen by Derek was nothing compared to the humiliation of learning how my husband had been treating me. That mortifying afternoon taught me that sometimes shame and embarrassment can be gifts in disguise, forcing truths into light that we need to see even when they're painful. I'm grateful now for that terrible moment, because without it, I might have spent years more in a marriage with someone who didn't respect my fundamental right to consent and privacy. The embarrassment faded. The truth remained. And that truth, painful as it was, set me free. If this story resonated with you, smash that like button and subscribe. Share with someone who needs to know that embarrassment can reveal important truths. Comment about a moment that exposed reality you needed to see. Remember, your dignity matters more than any relationship. Consent is non-negotiable. And sometimes our most mortifying moments are actually blessings in disguise.